For Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. Top diplomats from the Group of 20 industrialized and developing nations have ended a contentious meeting in New Delhi with no consensus on the Ukraine war, as discussions of the war and China's widening global influence dominated much of the talks. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov spoke briefly at the meeting, marking the highest level in-person contact between the two countries since relations plummeted over Russia's year-old invasion of Ukraine. U.S. officials said Blinken urged Russia to return to the New START nuclear arms control treaty and that Russia should release detained American Paul Whelan. Julia Chapman has more.
Western nations and Russia have accused each other of destabilizing the world at a meeting of the G20 foreign ministers in New Delhi. The foreign ministers of Russia and the United States met briefly on the sidelines, their first in-person encounter since the invasion of Ukraine. Speaking ahead of the meeting, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi told the foreign ministers there's an urgent need for unity of purpose and action.
We must all acknowledge that multilateralism is in crisis today. We should not allow issues that we cannot resolve together to come in the way of those we can.
Julia Chapman reporting.
A bipartisan group of senators has proposed legislation that would make railroads like the one involved in last month's train derailment and toxic chemical burn in East Palestine, Ohio, subject to new federal safety regulations and financial consequences. Ohio Senators Democrat Sherrod Brown and Republican J.D. Vance are key co-sponsors of the bill introduced yesterday. Here's Brown.
We know that railroad executives have enriched themselves by billions and billions of dollars in stock buybacks. We know at the same time over the last decade or so, they've laid off about a third of their railroad workforce. And we know that means more train derailments, less safe trains. It means that in too many cases, hazardous materials end up in the water or in the air the way they have in East Palestine. This bill will begin to fix this and especially hold Norfolk Southern accountable.
The legislation would subject all trains carrying hazardous materials to additional safety regulations and require state notifications when hazardous materials are transported through communities via rail. It would also increase penalties for violations. Israeli police fired stun grenades and water cannons at demonstrators who blocked a Tel Aviv highway, and protesters scuffled with police near the Israeli leader's home. The developments came as weeks of anti-government protests turned violent for the first time. In a late-night incident, dozens of police were called in to extract Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's wife from a salon besieged by protesters. Thousands across Israel staged a national disruption day. It was the latest in a string of mass protests against Netanyahu's plan to overhaul Israel's judiciary and weaken the country's Supreme Court. A wave of unusually intense Israeli-Palestinian violence in the occupied West Bank has helped fuel tensions, with radical West Bank settlers rampaging through a Palestinian town earlier this week. In a late-night address, Netanyahu criticized the protesters.
It's not allowed to beat up policemen. It's not allowed to disrupt the country's life or to block main roads. I understand that here there's someone who's looking to create anarchy, called Yair Lapid.
Netanyahu made no mention of a call by his finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, a firebrand West Bank settler leader, for Hawara to be erased by the Israeli state. U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price called on Netanyahu to publicly and clearly reject Smotrich's comments.
These comments were irresponsible, they were repugnant, they were disgusting, and just as we condemn Palestinian incitement to violence, we condemn these provocative remarks that also amount to incitement to violence. We call on Prime Minister Netanyahu and other senior Israeli officials to publicly and clearly reject and disavow these comments.
Smotrich later tried to walk back his comments, saying he didn't mean to wipe out the entire Palestinian town, but only to take tough action against militants and their supporters. U.S. intelligence agencies say they cannot link a foreign adversary to any of the incidents associated with so-called Havana syndrome, the hundreds of cases of brain injuries and other symptoms reported by American personnel working around the globe. The findings released yesterday by intelligence officials cast doubt on the long-standing suspicions by many people who reported cases that Russia or another country may have been running a global campaign to harass or attack Americans using some form of directed energy. Instead, officials say there is more evidence foreign countries were not involved. A federal appeals court has cleared the way for the highly contested construction in Nevada of the largest lithium mine in the U.S. The court is allowing construction while it considers whether government illegally approved the mine in a rush to produce raw materials for electric vehicle batteries. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal yesterday denied the request from environmentalists and indigenous tribes to stop a subsidiary of Lithium Americas from breaking ground near the Oregon line. The company and the Biden administration said further delay was undermining efforts to combat climate change as a 2-year-old legal battle lingers. I'm Christina Onnested reporting for Pacifica Radio.